Welcome back to History Otherwise, where we explore the paths not taken in history. Today, we are staring down the barrel of a date that is, well, it's etched into the bedrock of British identity. October 21, 1805, the Battle of Trafalgar. But we aren't here to celebrate a victory. We are here to pull at a loose thread and see if the entire tapestry unravels.
And it is a fascinating thread to pull. Usually when we talk about Trafalgar, we talk about the Nelson touch, that tactical masterpiece.
Right, where Admiral Horatio Nelson shattered the combined French and Spanish fleets.
And basically secured British naval dominance for a century. It's the story of a massive gamble that paid off.
Exactly. But today, we're going to look at what happens when that gamble fails. We've structured this deep dive into 3 distinct parts to really do it justice. First, we're going to pinpoint the single moment of chance, a literal splinter of wood that turns a famous victory into a crushing defeat. Then, we'll watch the catastrophic consequences unfold on the British Isles themselves, leading to invasion and civil war.
And finally, we'll zoom out to see the global cascade. Because if Britain falls in 1805, the modern world as we know it, from the language we speak to the technology we use, it changes completely.
It's a world remade.
A world remade by a French-dominated 20th century. Yes.
So let's set the scene. It's off the coast of Spain. You have the British fleet, outnumbered 27 ships to 33. Now, the standard naval tactic of the day was the line of battle.
Right. You line up parallel to the enemy and just hammer away.
But Nelson's doing something incredibly risky here.
Risky is an understatement. He's driving 2 columns of ships straight into the French and Spanish line, perpendicular to them.
In naval terms, he's letting the enemy cross his T.
He is. He's exposing the bows of his ships, their weakest points, to massive broadside cannon fire for nearly an hour before they can fire a single shot back.
It sounds almost suicidal on paper. The logic was, once he broke the line, the chaos would favor the superior British gunnery.
Precisely. It was a plan that relied entirely on shock, speed, and morale. It relied on the Nelson touch, the fact that every captain knew the plan and trusted Nelson implicitly to improvise once the melee started.
In our timeline, Nelson is shot by a sniper much later in the battle.
Yes, when the chaos is already unleashed and the victory is all but secured. But in this timeline, we're introducing what we call a single point of failure. Fate is less patient.
Right. Let's zoom in on the HMS Victory. It's leading the weather column, it's taking heavy fire, and here is the divergence.
It's not a sniper this time. It's the Spanish ship, the Santissima Trinidad, the largest warship in the world at the time. A 4-deck monster.
And a high shot from it smashes into the mizzen-top mast of the Victory.
A massive falling spar crashes down onto the quarterdeck, and that is the moment history pivots. Nelson isn't wounded, he is killed instantly. Crushed.
And crucially, this happens before the British line is broken through.
Yeah. Yes, that's the key. This is the nightmare scenario. Because the Nelson touch wasn't a rigid set of instructions, was it?
No, it was a philosophy held together by his presence.
Exactly. With him dead, command technically falls to Vice Admiral Collingwood. But Collingwood is miles away, leading the leeward column, fighting for his life.
So command on the flagship falls to Captain Hardy.
Right. And looking at Hardy's record, he's a brilliant captain, but he isn't the fleet commander. He doesn't have the authority to improvise on a strategic level.
So the head of the snake is cut off, the Victory is drifting, battered, and the signals stop.
And hesitation just ripples through the fleet. You have to imagine the view from the other British ships trailing behind. They see the flagship taking a beating and then silence.
No signals. No England expects.
Nothing. They revert to their training, which tells them that charging headfirst into a line of battle without a commander is suicide. The British momentum stalls.
And across the water, the French Admiral Villeneuve sees this. In reality, Villeneuve was famously, passive, almost defeatist.
He was. But seeing the British attack falter must have changed the psychology of the battle instantly. It gives him a surge of confidence.
So he acts.
He signals his ships to tighten their formation, to close the gaps. The British ships, instead of piercing the line, crash into a solid wall of timber and iron.
It turns into a bludgeoning match.
And in a bludgeoning match, the side with 33 ships beats the side with 27.
So the Royal Navy's shield is shattered. It's not just a retreat, it's a rout.
It is the day the wooden walls came down. And the consequences are immediate. You have to remember, Napoleon didn't want to fight Austria or Russia at that specific moment. He wanted England.
In our history, he marched his Grande Armée away from the coast in August because he couldn't control the channel.
But now news reaches him not of defeat, but that the British fleet is broken.
And Napoleon is a man of speed.
He performs an astonishing pivot. He orders an about-face. The invasion barges at Boulogne are still there. The soldiers are still mobilized. By November 1805, the English Channel,
That unbreachable moat.
it becomes a French highway.
That is a terrifying image. The Grande Armée crossing the channel. Where do they land?
Pevensey Bay, which is incredibly symbolic because that is exactly where William the Conqueror landed in 1066.
History rhyming in the darkest way possible. But surely the British had defenses. The Martello Towers, the militias.
They did, but it's a tragic mismatch. The regular British army is tiny compared to the French forces, and half of it is overseas protecting colonies.
So you have militia shopkeepers, farmers.
Maybe armed with pikes or outdated muskets, trying to hold back the veterans of Marshal Ney and Marshal Davout. These are French troops who have conquered half of Europe.
It isn't a battle.
It's a slaughter.
This leads us to the Battle of the Midway route on the North Downs. The British line breaks. London is wide open.
And this is where the government faces a choice. We usually think of the British government as this stoic, immovable object, but they don't stay, do they?
They can't. If the king is captured, the war is over.
So you have the flight of the crown, King George III, the gold reserves, the Prime Minister William Pitt, they all flee north, they abandon London.
Imagine the psychological shock of that. Seeing the carriages loaded with gold bars leaving the city. The king abandoning his capital.
It creates a vacuum of legitimacy. On November 2nd, Napoleon rides into London. He doesn't stay in Buckingham House. He stays in St. James Palace.
And he lowers the Union flag from the Tower of London and raises the tricolor.
He conquers the capital. But, and this is key, he doesn't conquer the whole island.
Because the king is still free in the north. The government reestablishes itself in York.
Right. And this is where the fall of the fortress turns into a civil war. Britain fractures geographically and ideologically.
So let's map this out. You have the north, royalist, fighting from York, and in the south.
In the South, Napoleon does what he always does. He sets up a client state. He finds the radicals, the anti-monarchists, the people who felt left behind by the aristocracy.
He creates the Britannic Republic.
A British republic under French protection. It's incredibly divisive. This new republic abolishes the aristocracy, introduces the Napoleonic Code, and even brings in the metric system.
For some, that would feel like liberation.
And for others, treason. This leads to what historians in this timeline call the British ulcer.
Akin to the Spanish ulcer in our timeline. A guerrilla war.
Exactly. It's a brutal conflict. Neighbors spying on neighbors, partisans in the Welsh mountains and the Scottish Highlands launching raids on French supply lines. It's scorched earth.
And it's not just Great Britain. I imagine Ireland explodes.
It does. The United Irishmen had just staged a rebellion in 1798. They must see this as their golden opportunity.
The Royal Navy can't stop the French anymore.
So French troops land at Bantry Bay. They aren't invaders there, they are welcomed as liberators. An Irish Republic is declared in Dublin. The United Kingdom, which was only formed in 1801, dissolves in less than 5 years.
A total collapse of the domestic order. But let's widen the lens. You mentioned the empire unravels. I think people forget the empire was basically a network held together by ships.
It was a web. And the spider at the center was the Royal Navy. If you cut the web, the network dissolves. Take India, for example. The East India Company was powerful, but it relied on British soldiers and silver arriving by sea.
Without that, the local powers push back.
Immediately, the Maratha Confederacy, which had just been defeated, rises up again. The East India Company is forced to survive by making, well, humiliating deals with the French. They become a French client in all but name.
And the Caribbean. The Sugar Islands?
Reclaimed by France and Spain, Jamaica, Barbados, they fall. And this has a grim, necessary detail we have to discuss. The abolition of slavery.
Right. In our timeline, the Royal Navy spends the 19th century suppressing the slave trade, the West Africa Squadron.
But here, the British abolition movement dies in the chaos of invasion, and Napoleon had reinstated slavery in 1802.
So under this new French global order, the slave trade continues unchecked.
It's a much darker 19th century in the Atlantic.
And even Australia isn't safe. It was barely a colony in 1805.
No, Botany Bay is starving. A French expedition under Nicolas Baudin arrives, finds these desperate settlers, and claims the continent. Australia becomes Terra Napoleon.
Let's talk about North America. This is one of the most fascinating ripple effects to me. The king is in York, but where does the rest of the elite go?
Many of them realize Britain is a lost cause, or at least a long war. So the government in exile idea shifts across the Atlantic. The Royal Navy remnants, the aristocracy, the refugees, They flee to Halifax and Kingston.
They create the Canadian Kingdom.
Exactly. So Canada stops being just a colony and becomes the new seat of British power. But it's a specific kind of power. It's hyper-militarized, anti-republican, a fortress. They are angry, they are humiliated, and they are armed.
Which changes everything for the United States.
It does, because suddenly Manifest Destiny isn't moving into empty space, it's moving into a wall of bayonets.
The U.S. faces a hostile, powerful monarchy right on its northern border.
The War of 1812 isn't a sideshow in this timeline, it becomes a fight for national survival. The U.S. either absorbs Canada or faces a permanent Cold War on the continent. The border becomes a fortified front line.
That brings us to the engine of the modern world, the Industrial Revolution. We tend to think of it as inevitable that Britain becomes the workshop of the world.
But the sources suggest that's not the case here, not at all. The Industrial Revolution was fueled by security and trade. Britain had safe shipping lanes, a government that protected patents.
But in this timeline, Britain is a war zone. And Napoleon looks at British factories, and he sees a threat.
He sees them as cannon foundries for the resistance.
Right.
So he suppresses them, he taxes British coal into the ground, he encourages or forces engineers to move to the continent.
The industrial hub moves.
It goes to the Rhineland, to Belgium, to northern France. The Victorian era, well, it isn't Victorian. There is no confident global British Empire to support it.
Britain remains an agrarian backwater, half occupied.
And Europe becomes the workshop. The railways that connect the world are built by French and German engineers, not British ones. The intellectual capital drains away, too.
This paints a picture of the 20th century that is almost unrecognizable. If we fast forward to 1900, what does the map look like?
It's a world dominated by the French continental system. There is no unified Germany because France ensures it stays fractured. That was always Napoleon's policy.
To keep Germany divided.
Exactly. And without British intervention, that policy holds. Russia expands east and south because there's no British power to stop them in the Great Game.
They likely take Constantinople.
And push into India and language. We're speaking English right now, and it's the global language of commerce.
In this world.
No. French is the language of science, diplomacy, and global trade. English is a local dialect spoken by a defeated people and a few isolated nations. If you were a scientist in 1910 wanting to publish a paper on physics, you'd write it in French.
Culturally, London must look different too. The architecture.
Completely. The architecture isn't that neo-Gothic style we associate with the Houses of Parliament. It's neo-classical. It's French. London is rebuilt to look like a sub-capital of Paris.
A city of repression and collaboration, not imperial confidence.
You'd walk down the streets and see the influence of the empire style everywhere.
This brings us back to that core idea of history otherwise. It is terrifying how much rested on that one battle. We often view history as these big sweeping tides, but sometimes it really does come down to a single moment.
It really is. We talk about the wooden walls of the Royal Navy. It turns out those walls weren't just protecting an island. They were protecting a legal system, common law, a linguistic dominance.
They were protecting the conditions for the specific type of industrial revolution we experienced. If that spar hadn't fallen, if Nelson had lived just a few hours longer,
the world is completely different. The global structure we live in today, the way we trade, the way we speak, the way we organize our politics, is, in many ways, an accident of history.
It leaves you with a haunting image. We all know Trafalgar Square in London. Nelson's column reaching up into the sky, guarded by those 4 lions.
In this world, that square is probably called Place de la Concorde. And instead of Nelson, there's a statue of Napoleon, looking down Whitehall, the master of a world he remade.
And perhaps the lions are still there, but they are looking at a tricolor flying over Parliament. A sobering thought. The world we know is fragile.
It is. And that's why studying these divergences matters. It reminds us that nothing is inevitable.
Thank you for taking this journey with us.
It was a pleasure to explore the path not taken.
We'll see you next time on History. Otherwise, keep wondering.